Hey guys, got another install for you. We have a 2010 Corolla Sport, and we're taking a set of Tein S-Techs, and we're going to show you how to install it. Here's what we're starting with. The front fender is 26.25 inches off the ground and the wheel gap is 2.75 inches. And in the rear, the fender is 27.5 inches off the ground and the wheel gap between the fender and the tire is 3.5 inches. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to apply the e-brake and you're going to crack the lug nuts at all four corners. You're going to actually crack them but not take them off, and you do this that way when you get the car jacked up in the air, you're able to easily remove the lug nuts. The next step would be to actually jack up the car. We jacked it up and did all four wheels at once, so we jacked it up on the pinch welds and put a jack stand in all four corners, lowered the car down, and started to get to work. Now that we've got the car up on jack stands, we need to gain access to the rear strut towers. To do that, we remove the rear carpet by just pulling it out. Then on the inside, you're going to find a couple of clips that hold this little access panel on. If you don't have one of these little clip removers, although they come in handy, a small little screwdriver will work to pry those off. Once you get them off, you just kind of peel it back. Aha, there it is. That's what we're looking for, is that guy right there. The next thing we did is we removed the lower nut that secures the lower part of the strut assembly. And now I'm going to have to interrupt and show a tip that I used. Although I made the that nut removal look super simple, that thing was actually jammed on there. And the way that we were able to remove that is we took the top part of our jack handle apart and we attached that on the outside of our ratchet, which gave us a lot more leverage, and with the more leverage you're able to apply a lot more pressure, which cracks it free. Ideally you'd have a breaker bar handy, but if you don't, this will work in its place. After removing the nut, you're going to support the rear suspension with the jack and install a set of spring compressors. More on that in just a minute. You're then going to use a 6mm Allen wrench and a 17mm wrench to break the strut tower bolt free. After you break it free, just use a 17mm wrench and take the bolt completely off, which will release the pressure on the suspension. Watch out when you do this, that bolt might actually fling up just a little bit. After removing the nut, you're going to lower the jack, which is going to release the suspension out of the pocket. But oh no, where'd our spring compressor go? So, in the process of recording, we may or may not have forgotten to press the record button when it came to these steps. But I will do the best I can to illustrate to you how we did it. So back when we said to support the rear suspension with the jack and apply the spring compressors, this would have been where we applied the spring compressors. Then you would have followed the normal process after that, which would have been to remove the upper strut bolts and then lower the suspension. With the spring compressor attached, when you lower the suspension, the springs actually do not expand and it holds it together, and then you're able to slide the entire assembly out. And just for comparison purposes, here's the old spring on the left compared to the new Tein spring on the right. The new spring measures about 11.25 inches, while the old spring measures about 14 inches. Now this doesn't mean that we're going to get exactly that much suspension difference because the suspension rates may be different. Now you can take your pretty new green Tein spring and slide it over your strut and slide that back into its pocket. And no, we did not make a recording error here. When you're reassembling this, you're actually not going to need a spring compressor this time because it's actually a shorter assembly because the spring's a lot smaller. Now just bolt everything back together the opposite way that you took it off and move on to the front. The first thing I did when we got up front is I located all the bolts that we're going to be removing, and I sprayed them with PB Blast. This is a penetrating lubricant, and it will make the bolts much easier to take off when you go to remove them. There are 2 bolts that connect the lower strut assembly to the A-arm. You're going to spray those. I sprayed the nut and the bolt side. I sprayed the nut that connects the brake line, and on the other side of the strut assembly, which you can't see in this photo, there is a connection for the sway bar end link. I sprayed that as well. After getting everything covered with PB Blast, we moved our way to the engine bay. We actually need to get under this piece of plastic here to access a bolt on top of the strut assembly. So to do that, we're going to have to remove this entire plastic piece and this rubber gasket that attaches there. So the first thing we do is remove this rubber gasket, and to do that there's little clips, and you're just going to pop them out. And the reason we're going to actually take off this rubber gasket is this plastic piece is separated into 2 pieces, so to be able to remove each piece independently, we've got to take this gasket off that holds them together. With the rubber gasket removed, we can now just take this piece, and you're going to pull on it to pop it free. It's going to give you a little bit of resistance, but if you pry, it just kind of pops up. As we move over to the driver's side, it's not so easy to get to the plastic because of the wiper arm, so you're going to use a 14mm wrench, and you're going to remove the nut that's on top of both these. Once you do that, they just kind of slide up and out, and then you're able to access the plastic piece to pull it off. Next, you're going to pop this grease cap off, and that's going to give you access to the nut on top of the strut tower. Then you're going to take a 19mm wrench, and you're going to break it free. It is very important that you're only breaking this nut free. You do not want to remove this bolt all the way. We're doing this step now while the suspension is still in the car and it's still all held together so it doesn't twist on you. We'll actually remove that bolt later when it's sitting on the bench, and if you attempt to do this step later on, the entire assembly twists and moves on you, and it becomes much more of a pain in the butt. So we do it now to make our lives later a lot easier. Next, we supported the suspension, and we began to take off the sway bar end link. This is a 17mm wrench and a 6mm Allen key. And as you can see, even with the PB Blast sitting on there, it's still a pain to take off. So here's another tip. If you don't have a means to break it with any sort of breaker bar, you can kind of link 2 wrenches together, and if you position them right, you can break it free. It gives you a lot more leverage. Just have to be careful because this can be very dangerous if it slips out or your knuckles get free, or I've hurt myself quite a few times doing this, but it works. After removing the nut, the end link just pops out, and then we move on to the brake line, which is a 14mm ratchet. This is another one that required a little persuasion from our friend here. The 2 lower strut bolts were by far the most difficult bolts to remove on the vehicle, and if you look on the left side where I'm pointing is the nut side, and the right side is the bolt side, so the bolt actually passes through to the back of the car, and the left side is the nut. That's the side that you actually want to try removing. We learned that if you try it from the other side, it becomes much more difficult. With everything below removed, we now go back into the engine bay and remove the 3 nuts that are holding the strut assembly to the car. Once these are removed, the whole assembly just slides out. With the assembly on our bench, we then apply a spring compressor to each side, and we're going to tighten each side little by little, moving back and forth from side to side. We do this until the spring compresses enough to relieve outward pressure onto the assembly, and we do this because once we remove that top nut. If we don't do this, everything will just kind of coil out and you have the potential of seriously injuring yourself. Spring compressors are an absolute must in this step. We then use our 19mm ratchet to remove the top nut, and since there's no pressure on here, once you remove this, everything just kind of easily comes apart. Once you get it all apart, you can actually take your new spring, place it where the old spring was, and bolt everything back together. And again, no spring compressor is necessary for the process of putting it back together because the spring is short enough to where it's not necessary. And for comparison purposes, again, we measured the springs. The one on the right, which is the new spring, is 11 inches, and the one on the left, the old spring, is 14.5 inches. And here's the assembly all put back together. Again, I don't have the top nut on. I'm doing that now. You notice that no spring compressor is necessary, and I'm going to tighten that as much as possible and then torque it a little bit more after it's in the car, and it's all held together by the actual vehicle. Alright, after everything's bolted back together, we take our final measurements, and in back, the final ride height is 25.25 inches. This is about 2 1/4 inch drop from the previous height. It's important to note that we also did this the next day, so we gave the suspension a little time to settle, so it shouldn't go any lower than this. And up front, our final ride height is 24.5 inches, and this is about a 1 3/4 inch drop from the previous height. And here's the final product. Total installation time was about 5 hours, and with the exception of a spring compressor, which you can rent at most auto parts stores, we were able to accomplish this install using standard hand tools that most of you guys should have in your garage. Hope this helps some of you out. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.